Welcome to Teaching That Counts, a podcast dedicated to the teaching and learning of mathematics. I'm your host, Abel Maestas, and I love to talk about math education. Together with my amazing guests, we'll explore several topics in the world of math teaching and student learning. Whether it's building thinking classrooms, healing math trauma, building student and teacher math confidence, or creating more equitable math workspaces. If it's going to help students learn math and teachers teach math, then we'll talk about it. So if you're a teacher, a parent like me, admin, or a coach like me, I hope you find something that can inspire you and help build your practice listening to this podcast. You can always find us online at www.teachingthatcountspodcast.com. Yeah, I know that's long, but hey, that's the URL. You can find me on YouTube at Maestas Math or on socials at Maestas Teach. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. Well, welcome back to the Teaching That Counts podcast. As always, I'm your host, Abel Maestas, and it is so great to have everyone here listening to the pod. Man, I've got a great podcast for you this time. This is our second episode of our third season, and guess who is back? That's right, none other than Dr. Peter Liljedahl himself, the author of Building Thinking Classrooms, which if you listen to this podcast a lot, you know that we highlight Building Thinking Classrooms quite often on this podcast. So he's back, and this episode is supersized. So it's so supersized that we actually have to cut it to two parts. So this episode right here is going to be part one of my conversation with Dr. Liljedahl, and we talk about some great things. We talk about some successes that are happening in my district and how that relates to our BTC work that we've been doing over the last couple of years with some teachers and their their willingness to start something new. And that willingness really has had some amazing effects on the kids and on their teaching. So I get an opportunity to share that with Peter, and he talks, just shares his thoughts on why those things are so important for those teachers and so important for those kids. So we talk about the stories of success that we've had in our district. But hey, once again, don't forget to send Peter your stories of success for building thinking classrooms. We also talk about the role of randomization and why he recommends going back to playing cards. Yeah, there's a lot of digital randomization tools out there, but he really gives a really good explanation on why using playing cards is really the best way to go. So take a listen to that. It's pretty enlightening. In our next episode, that'll be part two. We'll talk about some great things that happened at the Building Thinking Classrooms conference in Phoenix and some of those new topics that have come up in his new book. So, if you haven't gotten it yet, make sure you go out in there and get his new book, Building Tasks for the Building Thinking Classroom, K6. So, without further ado, let's listen to Dr. Peter Liljedahl. All right. Well, thanks for joining me today. I have a very special guest, and it is once again joining us for this podcast, Dr. Peter Liljedahl. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me back. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, I really appreciate every time that we get to talk and just to hear about what's going on and how much you're around and affecting different places. So I know we were just chatting about your time right now in Hawaii, and I think the listeners would really, at least definitely in my area, would love to know how you're working with the population that you're working with right now.
So it's a mix. So this last 2 weeks, I've been working with a complex area called KMR, and I'm working in schools. So most of the time I'm doing cross-curricular workshops for the entire staff. So I'm doing BTC workshops where we're doing language arts tasks and social studies tasks and science tasks, and applying and converting all those ideas of BTC into those subjects. But I've had the privilege of being in classrooms as well. So I've spent 3 days in classrooms so far teaching. I've been teaching and co-teaching. I've been working with kindergarten. Was that kindergarten? Yeah, kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and grade 4. The only grade I haven't worked
Wow.
with yet is grade 5. So I've been with a lot of elementary kids lately. I do have some high school ones coming up in 2 weeks, but prior to that, it's been primary, a lot of
Yeah.
primary. And encountering kids, what's really cool is encountering kids who, like, I walk into the classroom and they're like, "Oh, hey, Mr. L," because I was in their schools last year working with them when they were a year younger. And not only are they remembering me, they're remembering the tasks we did last year. And yeah, it's just such a great feeling to be with those kids. And it's the most diverse populations I've ever worked with, right? Like, Hawaii is so diverse. And I love the way that just brings out an inherent empathy in the kids, I think.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to work in the Bay Area. So we're in California, and California is a pretty diverse place, depending on where you're at. And I was in the Bay Area in Hayward, California, if you're familiar with the Bay Area, and
A little
worked at
bit.
a small charter school. And I would have to say that is the most diverse place that I ever lived. And I was able to teach students. And yeah, I can totally agree. The empathy is it's interesting when you have a very diverse population, and I really
Yeah.
appreciated my time there. Um, that's great. I know in California we have very diverse population, so I think that listeners would have, love to hear how things going. I My wife just started teaching kindergarten this year,
Yeah.
so we're about 4 weeks in, and she came to the BTC conference, the first one in Indianapolis a couple years ago. So
Yeah. In Franklin, Indiana. Yeah.
yeah, so she's working with the kids, just writing their numbers and getting their number sense going, and I think once she, figures out how to work with the kids to get them up and talking
Yeah.
and and doing things together. I know that it's definitely a different feel than what I'm used to because I'm used to secondary. So
Well, one of the things that is becoming apparent is that, like, in all these primary classrooms I'm in, there's a real need to create routines and norms and so on with the kids. But norms and routines are situated, right? So, like, you may have the routines really down on how kids are supposed to be on the carpet and where they're supposed to sit. And you may have routines as to, how they're supposed to be when they're in their desks or at their tables, and routines about how to line up to go to recess or go to lunch. And, like, you build all these routines, but all those routines are situated.
mhm.
And there's this belief I keep running into that we can't get to the whiteboards until we've built the routines. But the problem is that none of those routines are valid once you get to the whiteboards,
Oh,
right? Like you have to build routines in situ. So the whiteboards is a routine you're going to have to establish, and there's no reason why you can't start doing that on day one.
yeah, yeah. I had this conversation with a junior high teacher that it was like, well, I can't get the students control, so I need to put them back in to get procedures in rows and I was like, well, they're different. Like you need to figure out the management and the routine structure and the procedures for the groups. Just
Yeah.
don't go back. So that's
No,
I'm
they don't transfer necessarily. I was in a grade 5 classroom last year, and the teacher had never done BTC. And these kids were really well behaved. Like, I mean, total control in that class. And everything was quiet and orderly and moving. Like, the kids didn't run, they moved slowly. Everything they were doing, their routines were really on point. And I came in and we did the first task. I gathered them up. I told them what the task was. I sent them off to the boards, and these kids just went ape. Like, they were running around the room, screaming and yelling, and they were like yelling at each other across the room. And the teacher was just like in shock that these kids that he had worked so hard on becoming orderly. And we just let that go for about 10 minutes. And then you saw this sort of natural calming down. And then we gathered them up and we had a little talk about, what would be appropriate at the whiteboards, and sent them back, and it was fine. And then the second day I was in that classroom, no problem, right? But you have to build routines in situ. So it doesn't matter how good they are at sitting in their desks and doing their work. The whiteboard's a different space.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. I know that was been a question on a lot of people's minds about, just management with students and groups. Listen, so I went to the BTC conference in Phoenix, and there were a lot of really great things that I learned from the conference. But I wanted to share with you, I remembered how you had mentioned about sharing stories and that you really like about sharing stories. So I just have to share a story with you right now about some of the stuff that's been going great in our district, some of the, I guess, celebrations. So one thing, there's two really big celebrations. So one, I've been working with the calculus teacher, and for many years the calculus scores were pretty low. Like, and obviously we look at things more than just scores, but like in an AP class, we really want our kids to do well on the exam.
Yeah.
So she was averaging 5 to 10% maybe passing the exam for the last few years. So she listened to the first season of the podcast. She read the book, and we got together and worked through the whole year on changing the entire style of the AP calculus class to BTC.
Right.
And in July, she got her scores back, and we had always had the goal of getting maybe 30% of her kids to pass. Like, that was our goal. Let's go from 5 to 30.
Yeah.
And she got her scores, and she got 52% of her kids to pass the exam.
Wow.
And it was just, I mean, the buy-in was just a snap like that. And everybody is just, wow, this was so great. So she's working hard at it again. This is her second year now doing it. And she's upped her goal, and we're hoping that the students do just as well, if not better, when we add some other layers in.
And she's not just doing a service to those kids in terms of the course this year. She's doing a service for them next year, right? Like the students who go off to post-secondary and take their first calculus course at university, the scores there, the pass rates are abysmal. Right? Like, there are places I've heard statistics when there was this massive calculus project across North America a long time ago, but they were seeing that 50%, upwards of 50% of students going to university would have to retake their first math course. That's not to say that they failed, but they would have to retake it in order to be able to keep their grade point average up, or to be able to move into the program of choice, and so on and so forth. And these are the best kids coming out of our high schools, right? Like, right. And this is just a sign that, if you can mimic all the way to grade 12, you're not in good shape going into calculus, right? Like these students who are getting through calculus now in a BTC setting are going to be well positioned next year. I had a master's student who did her thesis where her question was exactly around this. What do you need in order to be successful at calculus at university or college? And she interviewed students who had just finished their first year calculus course at university. She asked them one question. What do you know now that you wish you knew coming out of high school? Mm-hmm. And nobody said, I wish I knew logarithms better. Nobody said, I wish I was better at trig. Like, nobody said that. What they said were things like, I wish I was better at finding people to collaborate with. I wish I was better at learning in groups. I wish I was better at time management. I wish I had better perseverance. I wish I was better at thinking outside the box. I wish, like, these are the things they said.
Yeah.
Right. Well, what does BTC do for you?
All of right?
All of those things, right? Yeah. A calculus lecture at university is not where you go to learn. It's where you go to learn what you have to learn.
Right.
And then you got to go away and learn it. And the best way to do that is in groups, trying to figure things through. Yeah.
Yeah. That's just the experience I had when I was in college. The reason I was able to get through that math major was forming those groups and doing those problems and getting practice and thinking through stuff. So I was just super proud of the teacher for, there were bumps in the road, but she really stuck it out. She was trying
Oh,
something
yeah.
new, and the kids are just so much more prepared. And so
Yeah.
one great highlight. The other
Yeah.
great
Hold
highlight.
on. Before you
Oh,
go
go
on,
ahead.
I
Yeah.
have this saying that it's a lot easier to get our students to post-secondary than it is to prepare them for post-secondary,
Oh, so true. So
right?
true.
So it's kudos to her for
Yeah.
preparing students for what comes next.
Yeah. And
And
so
even the ones who don't pass are still better prepared for what comes next.
yeah. Yeah. There were some kids that were struggling in the beginning, and they ended up with a 2 where we thought, well, they might get a 1, but the score alone doesn't
No.
tell the story. These
Yeah.
kids are now better prepared for their
And
experience
and
in
the
college.
vast majority of students who even get the AP credit still take the first year calculus course anyway.
Right.
So they're just so much better prepared for what comes next.
Yeah.
All of
So exciting. So great for the kids.
it. Good.
Um,
Awesome. Give
the
my
second
congratulations.
So you're working on building your own thinking classroom, and you're thinking to yourself, where am I going to get all these vertical non-permanent surfaces? Well, there's plenty of options out there that you can go and purchase your vertical non-permanent surfaces. One of those places that has some great options, I've already tried out these products myself, and they're sturdy. They're great with kids, and they're very good vertical non-permanent surfaces, is EAI Education. You can find them online, eaieducation.com. They offer teaching supplies, classroom resources, manipulatives, and educational games at really some of the best prices out there. EAI Education provides over 6,000 teaching supplies for grades pre-K all the way up 12th grade. Homeschools, parents, students, and even supplies for college classes. They provide safe and easy ordering and offer 100% satisfaction guaranteed on all their products. So if you're looking for what you need for your classroom, go to eaieducation.com and check them out. The second thing is that the district takes numbers on how many ninth graders have to repeat their ninth grade math class into 10th grade. And it usually sits around 12 to 15 to 20%, depending on the high school that we have here.
Right.
And one of the high schools that we've been working with that started BTC practices about a year and a half ago, this last year, they went down to 5% of students having to repeat their first math class. And so the director went and asked, like, what was different? And the administrator that wrote back that had asked the department, they said, well, we started BTC instructional practices a year ago, and the entire team started doing that and working together and working with the coach to do students a different instructional practice. And then the third thing that highlighted was just the leadership of the leader on the team. But what was impressive was that the administrator didn't mention anything about the way they placed kids or the grading changes or anything there. It was all instructional practices and credit to the building thinking classroom engagement. So it was really cool to see that, and that just happened this last week.
Wow. And okay, so like, are we surprised? Never mind the BTC thing, right? Like we've been working on the fringes forever in math education, right? Like we're trying to make better textbooks and better technology and better ways of grouping and tracking kids and so on and so forth. But we've known in education for eternity that the number one impact on student performance is instructional practice,
Yeah.
right? Like that's the number one thing. It's also the hardest thing, of course,
Yes.
but which is I think why we work on the other things so much. But instructional practice, that's it.
Yeah.
I love these stories. I often say that my book contains data and it contains story, but those are my stories and my data, and I hope to use them to inspire someone to do something in their classroom. But the things that's going to keep a teacher doing it are their stories and their data, right? So that school and that district where they're seeing way better completion of their first math course, that's their data, that's their story. They're going to keep doing this. And the calculus teacher who is seeing the pass rates going through the roof, that's her story and her data. And that's what's going to keep her doing it, right?
Yeah.
My data, my stories might inspire you to start it, but it's your stories and your data. That's where the real data is in, I think, everything, but in BTC in particular.
Yeah. Nah, so inspiring. So inspiring. So I'm really loving working with these teachers this year. So it's inspiring for me as a coach to be doing that. So it's just some stories, but let me get back to the conference. There was some really great things, but there were some ahas that I was like, whoa, that is some new stuff that totally goes counter to what we've been doing. So one of the things that really was kind of a mind-blowing thing was the role of randomization. And I know that there's so much technology out there to allow teachers to randomize and do their groupings on their screens. And I know that I had suggested that to many of my teachers, but you had some new information about why playing cards might be the better way to go.
Right. So first of all, I noticed that the listeners aren't going to know this, but I think you're wearing your conference t-shirt.
I am. Yeah, right. Yeah. Good.
The conference we're talking about now is not the one that your wife went to in Franklin, Indiana in 2023. We're talking about the one in Phoenix in 2024 in July.
Right. Yeah.
Which was amazing. And thank you so much to the conference organizers for putting on an amazing, amazing event.
It was fabulous.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And we can't wait.
It was hot. Holy cow, was it hot.
Hey, but next year it's in Seattle. So I'm looking for not 110 degrees.
Yeah, like I like to say that I like the sun. I don't like to be on the sun.
Right.
And that's what I felt like in Phoenix in July. But it was amazing venue.
Yeah.
Amazing people, so much joy and energy at that space. Yeah. Okay, so in the last 2 years, I've taught or co-taught in over 160 different classrooms, K to 12. And the research I do involves me spending a lot of time in classrooms, often as an observer, but of late as a teacher. And when you spend time in classrooms and you have a research lens on, research in classrooms is like peeling an onion. Right? Like you notice some things right away, and that's where you pay attention to. And then you're working on those things. And then when those things become so commonplace that you don't have to consciously pay attention to them anymore, you'll notice something else, right? It's like learning to drive a standard. That first time your focus is entirely on your feet. And then eventually that becomes automatic, and then you can start tuning the radio, right? Like it's the things that become so common that you don't have to pay conscious attention to it anymore allows more bandwidth to pay attention to other things.
Right.
And then you can direct your attention to different, and you can also, like I said, direct that attention. So maybe today I'm focusing on sort of the general mood in the room, but now I'm going to focus on very particular kids, or I'm going to focus on the launch. But later on, I'm going to focus on standing back and watching how the kids are managing sharing, right? So as things become normative in the classroom, you can put energy elsewhere. And about a year and a half ago, one of the things I started noticing, which had always been there, but I had never noticed it before, right? Because when I go in and teach a classroom with a teacher, there's things that I just follow along with however they're doing. So I say, so how do you randomize the groups? And the teacher will go, well, I just use TeamMaker or TeamShake or Flippity or Picker Wheel or Class Dojo or whatever. They'll tell me what they're using, or I use cards, or I use popsicle sticks, and whatever they say they use, that's the thing we're going to use. Because if they're already up and running with randomizing and that's a norm in the class, fine, we'll just use that. And when I did the original research, we always were starting off using cards. But, there's problems with cards. Cards are great in the sense that the kids like to take a card, but they don't always come back, or they come back torn, or they come back sweaty. And you're like, okay, where were you keeping this card? Because it's like really hot. Or they swap cards, right?
Right,
and
right.
So, and there's this so teachers kind of found other ways to solve that problem, and using technology was one of those ways. And when I was doing the original research into random groups, it was like, okay, yeah, all right, the kids don't really feel that same sense of agency, but as long as they're convinced that this is random, I'm good with it. And sometimes the kids weren't convinced it was random. And then we could up the randomness by having a kid roll a big fuzzy dice. And if a 2 came up, they get to come up and hit the randomize button twice, that type of thing. And we thought we had this solved. And it was fun. And then, like I said, about a year and a half ago, I'm in a lot of classrooms. We're using the digital randomizers. And usually the way when I co-teach a lesson with a teacher is I'll launch, because I've been working a lot on the launch lately.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll launch, then the teacher will randomize, and then we kind of work the room together. And then one of us will close, or we'll take turns closing the lesson or something like that. So I was always standing back watching the teacher do the randomizing. And all of a sudden, I started to notice something. And like I said, it's always been there. I just hadn't really caught it, because sometimes it's really subtle. So the teacher hits the randomize button, and then you hear, somebody will go, no. Or somebody will laugh. Like there's just these small little grunts and groans and so on and so forth. And it sometimes it's so subtle that it just kind of flew under the radar. I never really noticed it. And then all of a sudden one day I noticed it, and I started paying attention. So as soon as I heard it that day, like I said, I've heard it before, but the first time I really attended to it, as soon as I heard it, I quickly scanned the faces of the kids, and I saw immediately one child whose face was just like down, and the shoulders were down, and you could just see that they were having an emotional moment. And then I started paying attention to this more closely. And what's happening here is that when we do the digital randomizer and somebody goes, no, that's a form of microbullying, right? Yeah, and it's so subtle. It's so small. It feels like, whatever. But the problem is with microbullying of this type is that it's amplified by the size of the audience. When you have more overt forms of bullying that happens behind the schoolhouse, or, as the kids get off the school bus or whatever, there's not a big audience. And the size of the audience amplifies the impact of the bullying. So here we have this one person going, no. Everybody hears it. Everybody knows who said it. They know who they said it about. And that amplification makes it cut deeper for this kid, right? Because this kid is now becoming a pariah. Because the next time who has this kid in their group, they're also going to go, And by like 3 days later, this kid is like, this is a traumatic event for this kid every single day. And it's also amplified by the fact that it's happening in front of the one person who's supposed to protect the kids, and that's the teacher. Yeah. And it's not that the teacher is heartless here, but they're like me. They haven't noticed it. They haven't attended to it, or they haven't really thought that it's targeted or vectored. Or what we discovered after the fact was they are aware of it, but there's nothing we can do to shut it down, because we tried. We would be like, okay, before I hit this button, I don't want to hear any grunts, groans, moans. I don't want to hear any laughter, jeers, sneers. I don't even want to hear a sharp intake of breath. Are we clear on that? Right? Like, I'm going to hit the randomizer. You're just going to live with what you get. Everybody has to be neutral about it. Hit everyone. All the kids are like, yep, hit the randomize. And right away, someone goes, And you look at them and they're like, what? That's how I breathe. Right?
Yeah, that sounds like that sounds like an 8th grader right there, huh?
Right? Or I thought of something funny. Yeah. And it's like, there's no way to shut it down, because it's woven into the fabric of that social milieu, right? And it's so damaging. But then I started, why am I not hearing that with cards? And it's because when the kids take a card, they don't know who's in their group. They know where they're supposed to go. So that when they get there, they know who's in their group. But now, if they're going to go, they're less likely to do it because they're face to face with their victim, so to speak, but also because there's no audience to to sort of do this in front of. So we saw like it just drops way down. Someone may go, oh no, but now there's no audience, right?
Right.
Right. And so popsicle sticks, same thing. If you have popsicle sticks with names on it and the teacher pulls 3 names and says, here's your group, you hear the grunts and groans. But if the popsicle sticks have a number on it or a color and the kid just takes a popsicle stick, no groans.
Oh,
Now, that sort of moaning and groaning and jeering and so on, we heard it in about 50% of the elementary classrooms we were in. But 100% of the middle school and high school classrooms.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And we couldn't get it to shut down, right? And so just go back to the cards. And if they come back sweaty, go buy more cards. Like the trade-off for the social well-being of our students is worth it, right? Now, a teacher did ask me recently, she said, what if I do cards for the first few months, get them used to like, it doesn't matter who they work with, and then we do a digital randomizer? And I have to be honest, we've never tried that. And so I said, well, let me know how that goes, because maybe that will work. But when the kids are in that mood where they don't really care, and I think that's why we don't hear it in 50% of the elementary classrooms, because the kids are just so happy to work with anybody that they don't care who they're with.
Yeah.
But we'll see. I'll get back to you on that. But for now, like, I am not supporting digital randomizers anymore, just because of that social emotional damage that it creates.
Yeah.
Not for everybody, but a lot of damage for a small number of kids.
Which is enough.
Yeah.
Which is enough. Great. Thank you for that. I know that's going to help a lot of teachers out there. Well, that was part 1 of my conversation with Peter Liljedahl. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward for you to come back next month and listen to part 2 of my conversation with Dr. Peter Liljedahl, writer of Building Thinking Classrooms. See you all next time. And once again, thank you for listening.